Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show. Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark, and in this episode I'm joined by co-host Phil Lindsey. From the world of comic books comes one of the most popular superhero origin stories of all time, with a tortured soul committed to vengeance and trying to save the city that saw his parents brutally murdered and threatens to devour everyone around him. We're talking about Batman Year One. Batman Year One was written by Frank Miller and illustrated by David Mazzucchelli. It was published by DC Comics and released in 4 issues between February and May of 1987. Miller and Mazzucchelli had previously reinvigorated Marvel Comics' Daredevil with the critically acclaimed Born Again storyline. The two later took their work to the next level with Batman The Dark Knight Returns in 1986. This ultimately led them to the revamp of Batman's origin with Year One. Year One tells the story of a young Bruce Wayne recently returning home to Gotham City after traveling abroad and learning martial arts on his way to becoming Batman. Bruce finds the city in much worse shape than he left it, which only strengthens his resolve to fight back. Arriving at the same time is Police Lieutenant Jim Gordon, a good cop who was shipped to Gotham after turning on corrupt cops in his own city. The story then follows Bruce as he finds his way on the dangerous streets of Gotham, learning to mold himself into the kind of hero he wants to be, while also making enemies in the criminal underworld. Gordon also makes his share of enemies along the way, many of whom are corrupt cops in the Gotham City Police Department. As Gordon fights against those who would bring him down, he ultimately finds an ally in Batman, who believes he has found the one good cop that can help him wage his war on crime. Year One retells the origin story of many characters from the Batman mythos, including Selena Kyle, also known as Catwoman. Harvey Dent, who later becomes Two-Face, is also an important character in the story. Batman Year One exceeded all expectations upon its release, taking the Batman book from under 75,000 copies per month sold just 2 years earlier to nearly 200,000 copies sold per issue. The story was also a hit with Hollywood and was heavily referenced for 2005's Batman Begins starring Christian Bale, and again in 2022 with The Batman starring Robert Pattinson. Thanks to the top-notch storytelling, film noir-style artwork, and heavy drama throughout, Batman Year One remains a classic and is widely regarded by many as not only the greatest Batman story ever told, but also one of the greatest comic books ever published. And that's the lowdown on Batman Year One. So when it comes to icons of comic books, we talk about Marvel a lot here on the pod for a lot of obvious reasons. And for me, different reasons as well, not just for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but for the characters themselves, the published characters, the stories over the years, this, that, and the other. We've also, of course, covered DC, and we've covered the big heroes of that publisher, of the DC Extended Universe, of which we've covered some of the films here before. And great, painstaking detail, kids. And, you may agree with our assessments of what we thought, and you may not. To each his own. To each his own, folks. It's all subjective anyway. Everything has its fans, and every property has its fans and also its naysayers. But as a whole, I don't know that I've ever run into anybody that's like, oh, you know that Batman guy? Hate that guy. Worst character ever. I would think for the most part that if you're a comic book fan or if you're just a fan of pop culture in general, you know who Batman is, obviously. That's number one. Number two, it's not that you feel some kind of way about him, but there's probably something pretty cool about him that stands out to you. If you're a diehard comic book fan, he may not be your favorite or he may be an absolute favorite. But again, I don't know if I've personally ever met anybody that says, yeah, I hate that guy, hate the character, it's all kinds of screwed up. I don't think the character himself is screwed up. I think it's how he's handled that gets to be all screwed up. And before we started recording today, we were talking about another story that was was adapted and animated that they completely screwed up, which was The Killing Joke. But that's not what we're covering here today, kids. We're covering Batman Year One, and not necessarily specifically the animated film, but the legendary book. And I say legendary because it is legendary for a lot of different reasons. And as we record this, it is 2022, and that book turns 35 years old this year, which makes me feel even older than I already am. And I'm sure I sprouted a half dozen more gray hairs when I realized, yes, it's been 35 years since Frank Miller's seminal work, was released. The year before this, of course, he released The Dark Knight Returns, which is considered one of the finest pieces of comic book literature perhaps ever done. And you could argue one of the finest pieces of literature ever done. It's that good, folks. It's that good. If you've never read it, shame on you. You're doing life wrong. But this time, we're focusing on Batman Year One. Phil, going into this particular podcast episode, when was the last time that you read Batman Year One?
Probably since like the mid 2000s.
Hmm.
I went through a phase where I was buying a ton of Batman graphic novels in college. Just because I just was reading more comics than usual. Like when I was a kid, I could never really afford comics. So when I started working as an adult, I bought a ton of comics.
Right.
Um, so I just would just go and buy graphic novels, and I would always look for like what is considered the quintessential Batman story. So you get like that, Long Halloween, I don't know, like you said, the Dark Knight Rises, um, just a ton of stuff to go back and read. And I feel like when you look at what Year One did for the character, it's probably easily one of the most influential.
Oh, for sure. No doubt about it. I was like that to a large degree with music. I didn't get into the Beatles until the Beatles anthology. Like I knew about the band. Obviously, I mean, who doesn't grow up with the Beatles in some form or fashion? You may not be always exposed to their music, but you're familiar with some songs, and I was too. But the Beatles anthology put them on the map for me personally. And then I went back and started buying all the CDs, all the vinyl I could find. I couldn't get enough of it. So I have, again, like a similar story in terms of where you were with the books. I will tell you that when this book came out, it changed a lot of things. And Frank Miller is a prolific comic book writer. He's a prolific writer, as we all know. But I don't know if Denny O'Neil gets enough credit for his work on Batman in the books for bringing a realistic tone. Frank Miller gets a lot of the credit, and he certainly deserves it. But Denny O'Neil was sort of at bat first, and I think he did an admirable job. And then Frank Miller really, really brought this stuff to the forefront and made it mainstream. What is your opinion? And we don't have to talk a whole lot about The Dark Knight Returns because that's a whole other podcast for another time. But in your opinion, how does this book compare to that one in terms of, you know, sort of Frank Miller being on top of his game? Do you think this compares to that, or is that story so complex and so layered that you can't really compare the two?
It's interesting reading Year One in comparison to all of the other Batman stuff that he's written, whether it be Dark Knight Returns or Strikes Back or All Star Batman, and how Year One is just so subdued compared to some of his more out there ideas.
Right.
Like, um, you could like there are hints of his themes there, and you could like if you really like if you put this in front of somebody that didn't know of Frank Miller, um, you might not notice it right away. But like of course, after you analyze it a little while, it's like yeah, okay, yeah, you can see like the Frank Miller tones in this. But I think the reason why Year One is so accessible is because of that, and that's not a knock at the guy. Um, but towards the end of his career, he's gotten more and more out there with his ideas.
God, he really has. What was your take on The Dark Knight Strikes Again? Did you have a feeling on that? Because I thought it was so far removed from what he'd done before. It felt like it wasn't even him at certain points.
I've read parts of it, and I didn't enjoy the parts that I read, so I just didn't want to taint my memory of what I think of the first book.
Hmm.
So I was just like, I'm just gonna pull away, because there were just parts of it that I read that just were not good. Um, and reading bits and pieces of Holy Terror, which was supposed to be a Batman book, and I'm like, mm, yeah.
Right.
And I mean, like I said, but of course, mentioned All Star Batman, which is extremely polarizing, and yeah, I've tried to stay away from his later stuff. I've tried to just stay with the Frank Miller stuff that I enjoy.
Dude, that's a great answer, that you didn't want to taint your memories of the work that you loved. That's actually that's a great line. That's a great takeaway. I don't know if I would have put it in those words, but that makes perfect sense. I agree with you, man. I think that it is, yeah, a lot of his later stuff it just really feels like it's, I don't know. I don't want to say he's reaching, because I don't think that's what it is. I think he's evolved or devolved as a writer, if you want to really argue the point, I guess, if you can. But it just feels like he's not the same tone as he used to be for whatever reason, which is odd.
Yeah, it's weird because I feel like everything that works about Sin City, is what doesn't work about his later Batman stuff.
Hmm.
Because he tries to bring a lot of that, like, I don't even want to call it nihilism to the book, but it's like there's just weird ideas that he tries to introduce in there. You could tell some of it is his political beliefs, and it's just all over the place.
Yeah, I agree. He does. I don't want to use the word crackpot, because that's not me saying it. But man, the way he's spoken about these days, it's not really in glowing terms by a lot of people. That I don't want, again, I don't want to be insulting to the guy, because I think he's amazing, right? He's an amazing writer. Of course he is. But I mean, there's some of that sentiment out there, and I think it's a shame. And I don't know if it's well deserved or if it's just an overreaction or knee jerk reaction. But um, dude, for me, you're right. This is much more subdued. It's much more down to earth. It's gritty. It's more realistic. This book feels real to me. I mean, if this thing reads like an action novel, it doesn't necessarily read like there's a guy in tights running around dressed as a bat. It just doesn't even feel that way to me. It just feels like an extremely well written story. He, in my opinion, does not get enough credit. Well, maybe he does. I don't know that he gets enough credit for dialogue. Like the way this book starts, like you're on Jim Gordon's shoulder, and then you're on Bruce's shoulder, two panels away, and they both have like similar, you know, like dialogue in their heads, similar conversations about coming to the city and how they're coming, and Gordon's like, the train's no way to come to the city. Thank God she's flying. And Bruce is like, shouldn't have flown. I should have been on the train. I need to see the enemy. So it's like similar conversations, but different at the same time. But dude, his dialogue in this book, I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, I can't say enough good things about it, man. Talk about how he gets into the head of Jim Gordon. I mean, for my money, Jim Gordon's the star of this book from page one to the end. It reads like a Jim Gordon story, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely reads like a ground level Batman story. And I think the places where Frank Miller has always shined is where he kind of does like this noir esque, like hard boiled detective stuff. And that's the stuff that I, again, really enjoyed about his Sin City stuff. And I mean, some of his later stuff. I mean, even when you look at his Daredevil run, that's the stuff that I enjoy about it.
Hmm.
Um, and you're right. I think he does dialogue really, really well. It's just he has his moments where he introduces some weird idea in there where it's like, okay, I don't feel like the character is saying it so much as Frank Miller is jumping off the page and trying to tell me this.
Yeah, like breaking the fourth wall kind of stuff. You mentioned Daredevil, which we covered here on the show before, and we talked about Born Again, what that did for the character. I mean, you could make a very strong argument that Frank Miller was the salvation for Daredevil first, and then Batman second. Man, you could hang a whole career on one of these characters, but to say that you did it for two, I mean, and plus what he did for Wolverine, for God's sake, I mean, that's something in and of itself. I mean, this guy is, again, I use the word prolific. I don't want to sit here and bag on the guy and then not give him his props, because he definitely deserves it. He's and we talked about Born Again. It's Frank Miller with David Mazzucchelli, the same creative team that did Born Again. This book looks a lot like Born Again. If you had to do a compare and contrast, Born Again is not exactly an origin story, But there's a lot of, I would say, maybe similar themes running throughout both. But man, Born Again feels a little bit more fantastic than even this does. Like, who would think that a Daredevil book would feel a lot more outlandish than the Batman novel? Because in Born Again, you've got Nuke, you've got Kingpin, and you've got all this stuff and drug addiction. And then Batman, you've got Bruce Wayne in a toboggan with a fake scar at night, beating up a pimp. It just doesn't feel like I said, it just feels gritty, man. It's like a complete difference between the two books here.
Yeah. Yeah, there are similar themes, but I just think the relationship between Bruce and Gordon in this book is really the highlight of it. And it's kind of the biggest difference between that and something like Born Again.
Hmm. Yeah, Matt Murdock doesn't really have that. He doesn't really. I guess the closest thing he has to a Jim Gordon is a Ben Urich. Um, and Ben discovers. Doesn't Ben discover who he is? Doesn't he put it together himself? I have a hard time
Yeah,
remembering that.
yeah, I believe Ben puts it together himself.
Yeah, that makes sense. And kids, we're talking about the dialogue. I mean, this book doesn't start off with, you know, it was evening in Gotham City. Bruce Wayne was arriving. It's not your typical third person narrative that you see in books over the years. The book begins with, and the thing is, it has dates all the way through it, which I always loved. But it begins with Gotham City. Maybe it's all I deserve now. Maybe it's just my time in hell. And it shows Jim Gordon on the train. And he says, 12 hours. My stomach's been trying to eat itself for the last 5. Like, that is, 4 little paragraphs in, and you know what you're in for. This is some great stuff. And then it's just so good. And then you see Bruce on the plane, and he says, from here, it's clean shafts of concrete and snowy rooftops, the work of men who died generations ago. I should have taken the train. I should be closer. I should see the enemy. So he's already dialed into the mission. Um, what a way to start this book off, man. It's so good. And by this time, this is a returning Bruce Wayne. Kids, as you all know, if you know anything about Batman, as the mythos goes, his parents are killed. And then I guess at the age of 18, he splits. He says, that's it for me. I'm out. He starts traveling the world, learning how to fight, becomes a ninja, all this other cool stuff. Meets Ra's al Ghul. So there you go. Or Ra's al Ghul, I think is how it's pronounced. Does all this stuff, and then he's coming back to Gotham as a man to begin his war on crime. I don't know if we've ever seen anything like this before year one. Not told in this sort of, I don't want to say first person, but again, you're sitting on their shoulders. How important do you think it is that we have this type of story for Batman so you can really dig into who he is as a character?
I do think that it legitimized Batman in some ways for people. Because I think before that you've got this hokey idea of the guy in a bat suit,
Mm.
and even when you look at like the golden era of Batman, they never really give like a straightforward origin of him coming back to Gotham and how he got to the point where he was wearing a suit.
Yeah, dude, this is one of the best depictions of the relationship between Gordon and Bruce Wayne I think that we've ever seen, or I should say Gordon and Batman. I mean, it's been done well since this, but this may be. I mean, would you say maybe this is the best depiction of Gordon and Batman as two characters?
I would say so. I think it's clearly the basis for a lot of things that came afterwards. Um, that kind of enriched their relationship. Like when you look at Batman Begins, you could tell Batman Begins took a lot of cues from year one.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I mean, without Batman Year One, we don't get Batman Begins because this is sort of the blueprint for the whole film.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. And I mean, we've seen other things that are similar. It seems like the new movie is kind of based off of not year one, but Scott Snyder's Year Zero book,
Mm-hmm.
which year Zero, kind of takes some cues from year one as well.
And going back to Batman Begins, I would say maybe if you had to go a second route, and say what's another great, interpretation of these two characters, I mean, I would say Batman, the Christopher Nolan set of movies, because you got Gary Oldman as James Gordon, who is freaking phenomenal. And then of course Christian Bale is Bruce Wayne / Batman. I mean, they are excellent together. But Gary Oldman can do anything, and God, what a great relationship. I mean, this is the thing between him and Batman. Sort of lays the groundwork for other characters. It's one of those relationships that we see that shouldn't work, has no business happening. He's sworn to uphold the law, and this guy's in a mask. He's a vigilante on the run from the law most of the time, but they end up working together. I will say this for the upcoming Batman film. I'm very interested to see what that relationship between that Gordon and that Batman is going to look like, because I think there may be a chance that that one turns out pretty good as well.
Yeah, it seems like this movie has been coming for for years now,
Yes.
and like we're finally what like 2 months away because it comes out in March.
Hmm. I think that's right. I think, have they pushed it back again, or is it still March?
No, I think it's March, because um, Doctor Strange 2 was supposed to come out in March too, and that got pushed back to May, I think.
Wow. Yeah. You're right. This thing has been pushed several times. Yeah, March 4th is a release day for that thing, so we'll see how it goes. Yeah, Jeffrey Wright and Robert Pattinson, they got some big shoes to fill with Christian Bale and Gary Oldman. We'll see if they can pull it off. Um, yeah, again, I think without that, this book just doesn't work. And I mean, the story obviously is based on Gordon, and then of course Bruce Wayne / Batman after that. I love the way that Mazzucchelli draws Gordon in this book. This book feels very film noir to me. It feels very gritty and it's dark, and of course the shading, the lines, the artwork is just tremendous. The colors are very muted, like washed out at certain points. I mean, I don't know how this book is supposed to look, but when you hold this and read it, you're like, yeah, that's how this is supposed to look. It just looks the look of this thing. It's a beautiful book. The color, the art, dude, it's so simple, but I just, for me personally, I'm not a big fan of here's Batman in the daytime with Superman and the sun's out and there's birds chirping and you can see everything and he's not hiding in shadow. And I'm like, nah, that's not Batman to me. This, I think, is how Batman should be drawn and colored and shaded for the rest of time, because it's so good. To me, this is how he looks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely think a big part of why Year One succeeded is because of the look of the book. It's so simplistic. It's like a very minimalistic, cartoonist style.
Hmm.
Kind of when I look at it now, it kind of reminds me of New Frontiers, like some of the Darwin Cook stuff, but
Oh
it
yeah.
still has its own style. Like I'm just drawing a comparison to that because there are similarities in just how simplistic the art style is. Um, but yeah, I definitely think the look of this book, like just some of that stuff, like that the training in the snow and Bruce is out there kicking the trees, like some of that stuff is just so iconic.
Yeah. God, it really is. I love that you mentioned Cook. I love that guy. I mean, that book is New Frontier is just, man, it's so good. I remember when those books started coming. First of all, I remember the price tag, because at the time I think those books were like $8 a pop or something. They're just regular comics, but they're thicker. I could be off on the price, but I just remember thinking, God, I'm paying how much for this? And I think they did like 6 issues, I believe it is. But I bought them all, and man, once you start reading New Frontier, you're hooked, because you're like, oh my God, this is so good. Um, the animated film's not bad either, and we'll talk a little bit about the year one animated film here. Um, the characters in this book. This is our first, not our first, but you would assume like the new continuity. Because kids, if you don't know anything about comics, let's give you a real quick crash course. DC has screwed up their continuity for years. They do it all the time. Every time you think you got it figured out, they kill everyone, or they kill almost everyone. And then they go, hey, remember all those guys you love? Well, they're dead. Here's new ones. Or they'll bring people back from the dead and say, hey, remember you used to love these guys? Well, here they are again. We younged them up for you. So they're no longer like continuity wise should be 70. Now they're 20 again. Enjoy. And they do this all the time. They do it so many times, Phil, I lose track. Now, Marvel, to be fair, has done this crap before too. And I get it. Superman can't be running around with gray hair all the time. I mean, you can't. They stay forever young in the pages of comic books, and I'm okay with that to a certain extent. But in order to fix some of the continuity issues with DC, they move forward with this Batman Year One thing, and it's almost like it almost feels like let's wash the slate clean and start over. Not that that's what they did, but it almost feels that way because we see this is how he meets Selena, and you're like, what? That's okay. How? And so, but it works though, and it's totally fine. And I love it actually, and I think that there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of things about this book I love because it is a classic. But it does kind of feel like let's just start over. What do you think about the relationships that are formed in this book, and like the idea that this book is like can be like a jumping off point to a new Batman universe? And here's another part of that: is there a world in which they could have taken this book and just spawned a new Batman series and just kept following his career and just continued it? Or do you think it loses its punch if you go beyond year one?
Um, I do think that there is a part of it where there's a lot of really good world building he does in this book.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could have used this as like an ongoing series. But the problem with that is comics are so serial. So there's always another creator that comes on after somebody's run is over.
Mm.
And then it's just kind of like, those guys will come in and paint over something that the other guy might have done or give their interpretation. If this was used for like a finite series where it was like a run of books that had a definite end to it, then maybe. But like as a whole comic run, I'm not sure how well it could have worked.
That's a good point because you hand off to someone else, the art will be different, the writing will be different, everything will change. Um, yeah, good call. What about some of the characters? Let's dive into some of the characters here. We talked about Selena Kyle, so we can start with her. Hey, what do you think about the depiction of Selena Kyle in this book? Did you get enough of her in this book, or was it just right? Did you want more? I mean, what do you think about the way she's shown and depicted in this book?
Um, I really liked it. I liked the way they depicted where she came from. Um, just the whole red light district and her having her own protege, sort of.
Right.
um, I liked it. I liked the way that um they drew Selena's costume when she has like the basic Catwoman costume eventually. Um, I like it. There's so much there in terms of setting the groundwork for people that believe that Bruce and Selena are soulmates. And this is just such a good start to that. Uh, but the weird part about it, of course, is that Frank Miller has come back to the character and done other odd things with her. So,
No kidding. And listen, before we move on, are you are you on that same mindset that they are soulmates? What do you think about that?
out of all his love interests, I've always thought Selena made the most sense for him.
Hmm.
And I've always enjoyed this kind of uh, I don't know how do I want to put this tragic. There you go. This tragic story of them that they're just never going to work because he is just too committed to the mission. Um, and just as broken as both of them are, and they make so much sense together, it just is fated to never really work out. And that's part of why Batman Returns is so good.
Mm, good call. Yeah, dude. I don't know if I would have linked that together with this. How could I not link it together? Freaking Catwoman's in the movie. Uh, Even as outlandish as that is, and I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer's great, but it's still so over the top at certain points. You know, uh, But no, you're right. That's proof positive of why it wouldn't work. I don't know if I'd ever put that together. Isn't Tom King the one doing the recent stuff where they're actually getting married in the books?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Tom King is still writing the book, but I know that he was writing the story of their wedding. I don't think they actually got married in the end. Sorry, spoiler, folks,
Oh,
if you didn't read it. I think that something ends up happening and they don't get married.
because I follow certain creators on Instagram, and they will post random panels all the time. So I can't say I've been following the relationship for a while, but I've kind of been noticing it. And I haven't collected religiously in years, kids. And some of the stuff I do buy now, I'm not buying a lot of DC. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. But I've been kind of aware of this, and I've always heard great things about Tom King, so I should give him a chance, if nothing else. But I personally am just not on board for Catwoman and Batman. It just feels, I don't know, it just feels off. Like he deserves to be happy, but a criminal? Like, what? I don't know. It feels hypocritical maybe for his character, but that's my take. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, I think it fits because um, Selena's always been kind of a criminal with a code. She's not a killer.
Mm.
She's a thief. Like she has a line. And I think that's part of why they work because both of them kind of dance on a very thin line that they won't cross. And I mean, don't get me wrong, that Selena has done Selena has done very problematic things. Um, but I don't know, man. I think when I look at some of my favorite Batman books, like even when you look at Hush and how they're depicted in there,
Mm.
it just seems like they just belong together.
You sound like her attorney just then, man. It's like, we understand Mr. Cause has been accused of several problematic things in her past. That's a good way of
Yeah,
putting it.
yeah, some very problematic things if
Problematic.
you
Um,
putting it lightly.
yes. So listen, if this has been flat out been said, I've missed it through the years. The way she's drawn and colored in this book, she looks to be African American. And I've always believed that's how she was drawn in this. And there's precedent for that, kids. Eartha Kitt, sexiest Catwoman ever born. I love Julie Newmar, I do, but Eartha Kitt, I'm sorry, she's so there's precedent there for a black Catwoman. Did you take it that she's African American in this book?
No, I just always thought that she was kind of she just had a darker tone, but I
Really?
never read it as she was black.
Wow.
Because isn't the isn't the tie that her father is like a part of the mob or something like that? Maybe I'm missing. Maybe I'm getting it wrong.
I don't recall there being a tremendous backstory for her. I just know that she ends up taking out the pimp at one point. Um, but I don't know, dude. The way she's drawn and the reason I bring all this up is because in the animated year one film, Eliza Dushku is doing her voice.
Hmm.
And when I saw the cast, I thought, wait a minute, why is she? And then I thought, dude, have I been wrong all these years? Like I just had assumed that Frank Miller had gone the way of saying, hey, she should be African American. But maybe I'm wrong about that, man. Again, it's just the artwork to me uh, did not. It just doesn't say white woman to me, which again, totally fine with that. But when I saw her doing the voice, I thought, nah, dude, I must have read this wrong. All
No,
these
no. I
years, I've
think
been wrong.
no. I mean, I think it's open to depiction. Like of course, she's played by who's playing her in the new movie? I'm sorry, but Zoe Kravitz, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, there's precedent for it. I just the way I always looked at it is I looked at it like she just had, you know, a dark skin tone.
Hmm.
Kind of like, you know, to go into wrestling. I know people for a long time that thought Taz was black, and he's
Really?
not. He's just a very dark Sicilian man. Like he's
Right. Wow. I don't think I don't think I had ever heard that, to be honest. But no, I
like,
mean, yeah, wow.
yeah. I knew a lot of people that thought Taz was black.
Wow. Um, but yeah, I'm not trying to get hung up on it. I was just it's one of those things where like for years you think a certain way about something and then you find out you're wrong and you're like, "What? What?" So, yeah. Um, I love that this book and dude, Jim Gordon's got a son. If you know this book, you've known it for years. But the thing about this is his son later on becomes a serial killer. So things don't end well for Jim Jr. Uh, Dude, this feels like, I don't want to say Elseworlds, but again, they kind of revamped continuity and they kept the character around. And then Jim's wife in this book is Barbara, but later on in the books, they divorce. And then Barbara Gordon is not his flesh and blood daughter. She is his niece who he raises as his daughter. So again, Phil, that continuity. Were you aware of all this weird continuity stuff they did after this book?
Yes. Yeah, I know if he has his son because his son is in other Batman books, and he of
Yes.
course ends up being like a serial killer. And yes, I knew of that, and that's why I was trying to remember. I know that there's some kind of backstory with Selena, and I don't remember if it's from year one, if it's from Long Halloween, because Catwoman's in that as well. And I think the story from those books is that she's like the illegitimate daughter of one of the mob bosses, probably Falcone, I think.
Wow. Wow. Um, yeah, and listen, Falcone. Let's talk about some of these characters, man. You got Falcone, who is um, depicted in Batman Begins. A lot of the characters are lifted right off the pages and put into the movie, which is great. The voice acting, by the way, in the year one film is tremendous for the monsters in this book. It's so good. But you've got him. You've got Commissioner Loeb, which of course is a subtle, not so subtle nod to Jeff Loeb, who's the biggest scumbag. Not Jeff Loeb, but Commissioner Loeb, the biggest scumbag you've ever seen, next to Detective Flass. So you got all these people, just the worst of the worst in Gotham. And dude, they've all been getting along pretty well for a long time until Jim Gordon came to town and screwed everything up. And like the first guy you see the first guy Jim Gordon sees is Detective Flass, who looks like Biff from the Back to the Future movies. Just the big overblown jock, who tells Gordon, cops have it made in Gotham. It's very on the nose, dude, that the whole police corruption thing from the jump is pretty darn evident here. I mean, Gotham's full of bad cops and full of bad people, and it has to be, or you don't need Batman. But like, the idea of Jim Gordon being this one good cop in a squad full of bad cops, like we've seen that story play out in Hollywood many times over the years. Hardly ever plays out in real life that way. Not a lot. Um, but man, like that's Gordon's character, and dude, they give him the background of like special forces. Like he knows that Flash has had Green Beret training just by looking at him fight. And then later on, he holds off like five guys at once till they hit him in the head with a bat. And then he throws the bat to Flash to give him something to use and still takes the guy out. Like this Gordon is no joke, man. He's a real deal.
Yeah, I definitely like this depiction of younger Gordon because I think for a long time we only saw him a certain way, especially if you were used to the movies or the TV show. You only see him as just like the old guy that calls Batman when there's a problem. He doesn't really do anything on his own.
Right. Yeah. The red phone. Did you ever have you, how much have you ever dived in or dove into the original 1960 show, the 66 Batman show?
I was a big fan. I used to watch it all the time.
Yeah.
At one point, you know, when we were kids, we didn't have cable, right? So, well, we had cable at one point, but we didn't have cable, couldn't afford it. So, we just had like whatever what was on a tuner. So a lot of times, like they would just play a ton of reruns of the old Batman show. So I used to watch it all the time.
Yeah, I grew up watching it, to be honest. Uh, and people say, well, that was my Batman. That was my Batman. I'm not going to say that was my Batman because I was a comic book collector too. So, like, it was on in reruns when I was growing up, right? But it wasn't like this is the only Batman I know. I've been programmed since birth. No, because I was still buying comics or was buying comics at a very young age because I would take my allowance and blow every penny of it on books. So that wasn't necessarily my Batman. Like it was fun to watch and I enjoyed it, but no, it wasn't Batman. I mean, that's one of the things this book did was not erase that Batman, but say, hey, we're gonna make this guy legit. We're gonna make him adult. Dude, you have given your take on this before here on the 6M about that Batman is a kid's book. It started out as a kid's book. In your opinion, do they go too far sometimes with this? We got to make him dark. We got to make him dangerous. We got to make it super violent. I mean, this book seems to have a good mix. Do you think it's a good mix, or do you think they really take it too far sometimes?
Um, no, I think this book hits a happy medium. Like there's a good balance between both here. Like I said, this is easily the most subdued Frank Miller. He's not. We don't have Bruce doing some of the more graphically violent things we see in some of his other Batman books.
Yeah, because the Dark Knight Returns, there's a lot of stuff in there, boy. I mean, it's whew. Again, it's a classic, as we said at the jump here. But man, there's some intense stuff in there. Detective Essen, Sarah Essen, who ends up having an affair with Jim in this book, and they don't get too deep in the weeds on that. I don't think they really needed to, but you get the point of what's going on with the two of them. Did they stay with her character through the years? Because I'm not sure I know what happened to her.
Uh, yeah. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure if she shows up in anything again. I think she kind of just. I think she kind of just goes away after year one, unless I'm forgetting. Um, but yeah, I the thing that I really like about their affair is that the theme of this book is that Gotham finds a way to corrupt everyone, even
Yeah.
the most well-intentioned people. Um, and I just think that that is just a cool theme to go throughout this entire book. Like as good as Jim Gordon is, like even he is not, completely altruistic.
And Gordon's not, you know, doing things here because he's unhappy. His wife's pregnant. He's got a baby boy on the way. It's not like he's miserable. I mean, he's miserable in his job, which I think is what gravitates him toward her. They work long hours together, long nights together. There's a familiarity there. She's going through what he's going through. She sees the pain and feels the pain that he sees and feels all the time. And she seems like a clean cop, and he definitely is. And so when he breaks it off, I just think it's so well written that it's not. I think it would have been easy for Miller to go into this. I thought you loved me. I thought we had something. But I say that and it's comical because he writes this as if they're two adults having an adult conversation where instead of fighting it, she already knows. And she's not mad at him and she doesn't hate him, but because she already knows. And it's like, she probably knew that she had no business doing it. He definitely knew he had no business doing it. And they sort of come to an agreement, even though it stings. Man, there's so many moments in this book that feel very adult in the best way possible. That doesn't feel condescending at all. Like it feels like, and plus, not for nothing, Phil, he's not exactly off the hook because he takes a pretty good beating in this book, and he's in danger more than one time. I mean, it's not like this guy can just do whatever he wants and fool around and doesn't come back to haunt him. I mean, he does go through hell in this book.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I know I said that a big part of that I enjoy about it is that, the themes about Gotham, but I also feel like he writes people very realistic, and I think that's a good takeaway from what year one and some of the graphic novels that came out of that era managed to do. Um, they kind of changed comics from being this thing where everybody is like kind of perfect. Everybody's like this Pleasantville character um, that is in the same universe with Superman or Batman, where only the villains are truly bad people. And I think he writes characters very complex. Like there's like even like everything we're saying about Gordon, like he's a very three-dimensional character in this book.
Hmm. Yeah, well done. Absolutely not two dimensional at all. Dude, this kind of just came to me, man. As we know, the DCU is just obsessed with this gritty realism and stuff, and we saw what they did with the Joker film, which I still have only seen it the one time, and I like Joaquin Phoenix a lot, but I don't know. I got thoughts on that film. Have a product or a service that you want to get out into the world? Always wanted to try your hand at podcasting but don't know where to start? We've got you covered. Pod for Hire is a podcast production company that offers turnkey services to fit your needs. We produce your show from start to finish, allowing you the valuable time you require to focus on your established clients as well as prospective clients. We pride ourselves on delivering a top-notch product that will set your business apart from the rest and give your company the exposure it deserves. For more information, give us a call at 1-828-800-9880 or email us at info@podforhire.com. Pod for Hire. We take the work out of podcasting. But in a world where DC will just make a standalone Joker movie that has no connections to the rest of the DCEU, dude, would the day come that maybe they make a serious go of a Batman Year One and it doesn't have to connect to anything? It could be a standalone, shot very film noir, muted colors, stick to the book, stick to the theme, stick to the look of the characters. I personally think it would be tremendous to see this play out in live action. Do you think they'd find a way to screw it up, or you think it would be good?
I would enjoy it, but just because of how Hollywood works, you know that they wouldn't just stick to one movie. If it did well, like they would have to try and make a sequel. Um, Yeah, like I feel like if that was one of those things where they did like an exclusive to HBO Max or something,
Mm.
maybe. But I feel like even then, if it did well enough, they would just be so tempted to want to mess with it and do a second one. Um, I really feel like Batman Begins is the closest we're gonna get, and probably to a closer degree, probably Mask of the Phantasm is the closest we're gonna get.
Mm. Yeah, good call. Yeah, love that film. There's another one that may be in the hands of the right director. Just saying.
Yeah,
Uh,
I am of the belief that Mask of the Phantasm is the best Batman movie.
it's very good. It's very good, for sure. I really love that film, man. Um, yeah, you're right. I guess Batman Begins might be the closest we get to in terms of live action. I think I'm okay with that. I mean, the infamous scene where the bats come flying all the way across town to bail him out, get him out of that building. I mean, that's very Batman Year One. A lot of things that happen are Batman Year One, and that's really awesome that they incorporated that. And I think that's Christopher Nolan's way of acknowledging the books. And I'm telling you, Phil, more often than not, when we see creative forces on these films that do not acknowledge the books, or they do it in such a tongue in cheek way that it's kind of not offensive, but insulting, that's when the movie fails. Because, man, fans can smell BS from a mile away. I'm not saying fans are always fair, because they're absolutely not. But, dude, when you have an outcry of fans on one film, and it's every single word is spoken is this is crap. And then you're like, you know what? I'm going to give it a chance. I'm not going to listen to this. And you go watch it. You come out of the theater going, oh man, that was crap. Like it's not one of those things where it's like, well, there's two movie critics reviewed it badly. No. It's when the majority of fans are all saying, yeah, I gave it a chance. It's not good. But again, dude, he put it in the hands of the right people. Maybe Batman Year One would work. They did a Batman Year Two in the books, which was not a direct follow up, but it's followed like the same themes. There would definitely be a Batman Year Two, wouldn't there?
Yeah, and I mean, there's a Batman Year Two comic, isn't there?
Yes, that's what I mean. They did it, but I mean it I don't know if it's exactly year two, like like literal a literal year two or not.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think it's a different writer and artist. Um,
yeah, I'm pretty sure it is.
yeah, but yeah, for sure, if it was a movie, they would absolutely try to do a sequel.
We didn't get that much of Harvey Dent in this book, but what we got was great. And I don't know why I love it so much, but just those little moments where he just feels like the cool guy. It feels like he's cool. It's the way he's drawn. He's cool. He's hip. Like Batman's hiding out under his desk. Like he's already hooked up with this guy. Like, and it sucks knowing what he's going to become later. But there's the few moments that you see him. I think you only see him twice in this book, maybe. But man, they make it count. Frank Miller makes it count because I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I think we get a glimpse of why Harvey Dent could have been seen as the guy that could have cleaned up Gotham City, but of course the city finds a way to corrupt everyone.
Hmm. And it's cool that Gordon, they've got him as a suspect to be Batman. And they even, I mean, Sarah points him in the direction of Bruce, like, hey, you don't know if you know this, but his parents were killed at a young age. And, he's rich and you need money to do this. And of course, they visit his house and he's got the girl on the sofa and he says, she speaks a language, but I don't know what it is. That's great. It's very, again, that's a Christian Bale tactic where he's like a playboy and trying to throw people off the scent. Um, I mean, the themes in this book, man, it's again, it lays the groundwork for stuff that comes much later. I guess the mythos you could say are developed in this book. I mean, just imagine, man, had Gordon ever stepped foot in Gotham City, you know, things would have continued the way they had been for years. Like, maybe Batman doesn't work. Well, he might would have been killed in this book. I mean, if no Jim Gordon to stop these guys from going all Gestapo all the time, Bruce Wayne might have been shot dead in this book.
Uh, yeah, maybe. Is this the first depiction we see of Bruce Wayne where he's kind of using Bruce Wayne as kind of like a mask and you know playing up this playboy character?
I can't say for sure because there's a lot of books that come before this, obviously. I can't swear to that, but man, it sure feels like it, again, that this book is the template for everything that comes after. Maybe it is.
Yeah, I don't know. Man, because I'm just thinking like I remember it in this book, and I remember it used in other books afterwards, but I don't remember if anything came before it.
I'm not recalling anything. If it's a singular comic issue, it could have just, zipped by me at some point. I don't know. Um, Kids, if you've never checked out the animated feature, it's excellent. This is one of the times where DC completely nailed it. Dude, every bit of dialogue in that film, and I mean every bit, comes directly from the book. I mean directly. They may have changed a few words around here and there and add a couple things like the reporter in the beginning that sees Bruce come to the airport. They retrofitted that to be Vicky Vale. When in the book they call her Jackie. I didn't get too hung up on that. There's a few things dialogue wise. They don't include every voiceover, but they've got some. But man, the film dates back to 2011. It's really well done. Um, Definitely
Yeah.
worth a second viewing for sure.
They do the iconic scene of him coming in with the other billionaires through the smoke and saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, you've eaten well."
Yes. Uh, you've eaten Gotham's wealth its spirit. Your feast is nearly over. From this moment on, none of you are safe. Oh, it's good stuff. Um, Ben Mckenzie, who 3 years after this film was released, portrayed Gordon of all things in the show Gotham. Ben Mckenzie did the voice for Bruce Wayne / Batman in this film. I like Mckenzie. I was actually a fan of the OC, believe it or not. My wife and I watched it when it came on TV, and like, it was much younger than us at the time. but I'm thinking, we'll give it a shot. And it's one of those few shows that we watch from beginning to end every single season. I really like him. And I thought, and I wasn't a huge fan of Gotham, but I like him a lot. His voice work in this film, in my opinion, it didn't blow me away. And I really wanted to like it. But dude, there's moments when he speaks and I'm not feeling it. It's almost like he doesn't feel it, which I'm sure is completely unfair to this guy. It's just the way it hits my ears. And dude, maybe subliminally or subconsciously I'm trying to connect it to Kevin Conroy, which I think probably everybody does. But he's also trying to perform next to Bryan Cranston, who's Jim Gordon, who maybe should have played Jim Gordon in real life a long time ago. That would be, and if you ever cast this movie there, Phil, get it before Bryan Cranston gets much older because he's great. What'd you think about Ben McKenzie? Do you remember Ben McKenzie's voice work in this movie?
Yeah, I think he did well enough with what he was supposed to do, but voice acting is so, man, it takes a real talent to be like a notable voice actor. Not just anybody can go and be a voice actor. And I think sometimes when you just go and get like well-known actors,
Mm.
and you put them in these animated films, like they're not known for their performances with just their voice. They're known for all these other things that they put into their performances that have nothing to do with like, how they deliver a line. And so sometimes, when you get people in the booth and just have them deliver the line, sometimes it just doesn't hit the same. And that doesn't mean that they're not a good actor. It's just sometimes, it's a different skill set that goes into being a voice actor.
That's fair. That's a fair assessment because your inflections mean a lot. Your tone means a lot. The way you carry your words, your stops and starts, your hesitation. Yeah, it's an art form. 100% agree. I often ask you this about stories in films and TV shows and whatnot. But is there any moment during this book where there's a story point, or there's maybe a plot hole, or there's a scene where you're like, I'm not feeling this? Is there anything like that, or does everything flow pretty well for you?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. Like it flows pretty well, but that could be that I'm still remembering the book with rose-colored glasses because it's such a great book, and I'm just blocking out any of the stuff that
Right.
doesn't doesn't work well. Um, yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head where I was like, yeah, why did he put that in there?
It's so funny, man, that Frank Miller had the task of writing the guy's last story. Supposedly at the time it was his last story, and writing his first story. Like, you should be so lucky to be able to have that kind of power um, in comic books or in any genre. Robert Kirkman, Walking Dead creator, as we all know, has a great line about Frank Miller, and he says, Batman lives in the shadow of Frank Miller now. There's Batman before Frank Miller and Batman after. And he says, and I think that he introduced this concept of this grim and gritty, scary Dark Knight that still prevails to this day. Kurtman's got an excellent point. Like, there is Batman before Frank Miller and Batman after. And I can't imagine whatever would have happened with this character had Frank Miller not come along. I mean, that's a fair assessment, isn't it?
No, I think it's absolutely great point because we just talked about how, for some people, the 60s Batman and him dancing and doing the other kind of campy and goofy stuff, like running along the boardwalk with that giant bomb. Like, you think of Batman for some people.
He
So
sees the baby carriage and he can't throw it across.
sometimes you can't get rid of a bomb.
That's right.
um yeah, so I do think that there's so much that he brought to this character in terms of making him a serious character and um adding believability to the fact that this guy can go and dress up as a bat and actually terrify um criminals.
And we've all had these conversations over the years about how, well, Batman is the everyman. He's the real guy. He doesn't have powers. He's only had training. No powers, just training. There's a good shirt. Um, and so we've always heard that. We've always talked about it as fans. We've always, known this. It's common knowledge. But like, how much of all that was common knowledge and repeated verbatim before year one? That's a good question, because I think this book basically gives you the blueprint. Like, if in a world where you have a city this corrupt and people are so corrupt they would never imagine someone would ever defy them, there's a, slim, albeit very slim possibility that this could work, that there a guy with enough resources, this could work. Now, you're talking about a grown man physically outrunning an entire police force who are chasing him, which good luck. But this book just feels like, man, this it just feels real. I mean, as much as a comic book page drawn and colored and inked could feel, it just feels real to me, man. I still think, and I love Batman Begins. And you're right, it's probably all we're ever going to get. But in my head, there's a beautifully shot movie, live action. Um, it doesn't have to be people we know. It could be anybody. It could be any aspiring actor that he's maybe becomes the next big thing, or he's just very talented that comes down the pipeline. That's like, hey, this guy here, this is someone we could do something with. I mean, oh, I'm filming the story in my head as we speak. Can't help it. It's is this, and there's a lot, right? I mean, if this is not the best Batman story ever written, what would top it? Would Dark Knight Returns top it, you think?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I think Dark Knight Returns is up there. I know, for me personally, I think my favorite Batman graphic novel is probably Long Halloween.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know if I would say that is actually that's better than year one. In terms of just how good the book is, in terms of just how influential it was. I think it kind of pales in comparison. And I mean, that's not a knock on Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, but um, that year one is just it's a, kind of in a league of its own in terms of what it did for the character.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's in a class by itself, man. I think it really is in a class by itself. I mean, it's just, and there's a lot of Batman stories out there. As we said about Killing Joke, I love the Killing Joke. I can't remember if we said that off air on air, but Killing Joke is very dark, and it's very, I mean, it's Alan Moore, baby. I mean, Alan Moore, come on. But it's very dark, and there just seems to be like there's just no there's no sunlight in that book. It feels like it's just all dark, and that's fine. I mean, not every story has to be sunshine and Superman and all that stuff, but it's got its own tone to it, and I love that book. It's got its own vibe. So is it a great Batman story? Yes. Is it top five? Maybe, maybe so. I don't know, dude. Again, a lot of great Batman stories out there. But I think year one it's definitely top five for me. At any given time, it's number one. Dark Knight Returns is hard to top because the scope of it, I think, is the word I'm looking for. The scope of that book, the gravity of that book, the thing weighs a lot. Like, there's so much going on in that story. Um, I mean, it's such a weird juxtaposition of that book versus this book, that it starts off with an old Bruce Wayne versus the young guy coming back to town. I mean, it's just, God, man, it's just so different. Yeah, I in my head I'm looking for ways to continue this thing. I guess just because I love it so much. I don't think there's been and again, you could say Denny O'Neil, you could say Tom King's a modern day version of it. Perhaps there's been other guys who have written Batman wonderfully over the years. Um, but I just think Frank Miller gets him, just like he gets Daredevil, just like he gets Wolverine. I just think he just gets it. He just understands these characters, and I don't know. I just don't think you can teach someone that stuff. I think either you have it or you don't. I love this story, man. Where does it rank for you in terms of your all-time favorite? Not just Batman comic book stories, but your all-time favorite comic book stories.
I would say it ranks pretty high. I because I mean, there's an entire generation that doesn't know that year one came out in floppies. They only know it as the graphic novel,
True.
because for it came out in what 86, 87, something like that.
Year one. Let's see. Well, it turns 35 this year, so it came out in 87.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, there is a whole generation of people that do not know that it came out in standalone issues, and people had to, wait um a month for each issue and didn't sit and read it in one setting, right?
Mm.
So when I think about year one, I think about just going and getting the entire graphic novel and reading it, cover to cover. And because of that, I think that it's aged a lot better than a lot of other comic book stories I've read. Um, and just what I think about what it means to, like I said, the time period we're in. We're in an era where a lot of people don't go in comic book stores. Um, a lot of people that find stuff like year one, they find it in a Barnes and Nobles or somewhere. And so that era of reading graphic novels that way is how a lot of people got into comics.
That's fair. When's the last time you've been in a comic book store, by the way?
Um, maybe about a year.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I haven't been in a comic book store in a long time. Um, it's just a time thing, and just I don't have the exposable income to just buy a ton of comics like I used to.
Right. Is it hard for you to go in a comic book store and not spend like $50?
Yeah, I find a lot of times I'll do what I do when I go in bookstores is I'll buy a ton of stuff and I'll go, yeah, this looks great. I can't wait to read it. And then I'll have a stack of stuff that I haven't read a year later that's like, oh, I probably should start reading some of this stuff.
Oh man, dude, I've been to Comic Con and been to Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina. I don't know how many years in a row. We lost count. We're talking double digits, years in a row. And every year I come away with a backpack full of stuff, thinking, "Oh my God, it's the best stuff I ever bought ever." And dude, I have so much stuff that I have not. I mean, I've read maybe half, maybe. Like, and there's so much stuff. I got a bookshelf I'm looking at right now, full of stuff that's beautifully drawn and written, and I just haven't got to it yet. It's crazy.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I feel like my eyes always get bigger than my stomach every time I see some of this stuff. And
Yeah.
so it's like, yeah, this looks awesome. I can't wait to read it. And then I'll end up just, having tons of this stuff sitting in my house. And it's like, all right, well, one day.
Yeah,
Uh,
same here. Plus, when you go in a comic book store, you feel bad about not dropping some kind of change because you know the guy at the counter is not making a ton of money off this stuff. So
yeah, that's definitely part of it. And just conventions. It's just so hard to go to conventions and not end up buying a bunch of cool stuff because
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
It's a convention. Like there's just kind of culture around going to these things.
It's so funny because when I first started going, my focus was on the bus. Like I had to have the resin bus, and they didn't have to be the exclusive, limited edition, numbered. I never dropped enough coin for that, but I wanted to walk away at least with 1 to 2 busts every year. Some trade paperbacks if I could get some, and I would look for back issues of the Avengers or back issues of Iron Man or whatever it was I was looking for at the time. And now these days, my focus is on pop vinyls and a bust if I find a cool one, and then a bunch of trade paperbacks because I've got 11 long boxes and I don't have room for 12. So, yeah.
Yeah, my convention days, it would usually go, okay, this looks like a cool panel to go to, and I have all these panels I want to go to,
Mm.
and in the midst of it, like I'd end up just kind of walking around Artist Alley and talking to a bunch of artists, and that's usually what I ended up doing most of the time when I was there. Just end up talking to a bunch of artists, and like in the midst of that, it's kind of like going in Walmart. You always walk past stuff where it's like, I know I don't need that, but what is that over there?
Right. Something catches your eye. Um, I remember going to the con one year, and this was, dude, we're going way back now. And this is before any Marvel really had any good movies. And I think it was after Blade hit. And Joe Quesada was editor in chief of Marvel at the time, Marvel Comics. And he was at a panel, and I had my hand up, and he came to me, and my question to him was, we often hear about, we see DC making the rounds, and Superman films and Batman's hitting big, and all this other stuff through the years. And Marvel, you guys can't seem to, to get to play. What do you attribute all this to? What do you think is preventing Marvel from getting to the next level? And his answer very simply was bad business moves. He said we hook up sometimes with the wrong creators, and we throw all our chips on the table and with one company, and then those people don't have the right ideas, and we take wrong turns sometimes. And then fast forward now years later, and they dominate Hollywood, and I'm like, oh man, I love it. I'm here for it. But at the time, they couldn't figure out how to put their socks on. They couldn't put two and two together. But man, look how far they come. It's crazy.
So speaking of conventions, like before movies, I remember being at a convention before the first Thor movie when came out, and I was at a panel with Chris Hemsworth there, and this is before we had ever seen the Thor movie, and it was
Wow.
kind of like right after he did Star Trek, and it was just like, oh, this guy, he kind of looks the part. He's tall, he's a good looking guy. Maybe it'll be all right. It's kind of crazy to think about that now. And I mean, I remember being in a panel for it was something Batman related, and Kevin Conroy was the guest, and
Oh man.
afterwards, I remember like the crowd got like closer to the front. He's just like talking to people in the front, and like the crowd just standing around him talking, like pre-COVID days, guys. Um, and he's just standing there talking, and he's like, "Oh, all right, guys, well, see you later," and he just walks out the door. It's like, okay.
Oh, that dude, he seems so cool. And he could be the biggest jerk you've ever met, but he's never come off that way in an interview that I've ever seen.
No, not that I know of.
Um, I mean, you could, if you could say Frank Miller is the definitive voice of Batman in print, you could definitely say Kevin Conroy is the definitive voice of Batman, period. I mean, in terms of the actor himself, I mean, man, it's hard to. I mean, you close your eyes and you can hear him as Batman. Like I can hear the voice in my head right now because it's just he just got it. I mean, his Bruce Wayne is fantastic. Like
Yeah,
it's so far removed. Like you would never know it's the same guy if he were in front of you. You wouldn't know it's the same guy.
yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I again, in another world, Kevin Conroy could have played the Dark Knight, in my opinion. We're we're probably way past that, but he is an actor after all. So
Yeah, he just does such a great job of changing the voice, and it's not like this growl that is like kind of like indistinguishable from like English language. Like, I don't
right.
know. And I mean, I enjoy Christian Bale a lot, but sometimes that gravelly voice he doesn't quite work for me.
Yeah, it's hard to swallow sometimes. I still submit and maintain that the vocal performance in Batman Begins is off the charts because it's meant to be terrifying. It's meant to be scary, which to me it is. In the first scene where he's pulling them through the darkness and stuff, and he's yelling at them, it's good stuff. Now you go to parts 2 and 3, and it's like, yeah, I've kind of heard it. But for me, in part 1, it's great. Um, I mean, all right. So which one works better, Bale doing the gravel, or Ben Affleck with the voice modulation happening?
Mm. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the voice modulation either.
No.
um, yeah, probably Bale, just because I got used to it after a while.
Yeah. 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 Same here. But yeah, Conroy didn't have to. He didn't. There's no electronics happening on that dude's voice, and it's almost like it's. Imagine a guy getting that low with his tone and then bouncing right back up. Like James Earl Jones, obviously Darth Vader has an amazing voice, but that's his speaking voice. He walks around all day sounding like Darth Vader because Uh, so I don't know that he really has a range button. I don't think he has one. That's just how he talks. But like to find an actor that can take it up and then way down the drop of a hat, I think that's rare. I think it goes back to your earlier point, dude, about how voice acting is not the easiest thing in the world. You really have to have a knack for it and have a talent for it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a different, it's a different skill set that goes into playing Batman, and it sounds kind of crazy to say that. It's not like this is like some, Shakespearean role where you got to come into this with all of these huge acting chops. But I do think that there's more that goes into the role than people think.
Yeah, I agree with that. And um, yeah, it's just it's not Superman. Man, that sounds like I'm bagging on people. It's not Superman. Like it's Superman's different too, but it's not Superman's not way down here because he can't be. That's not Superman. There would have to be a change, but it's not. I mean, Christopher Reeve again. The first guy that did it was the best guy that did it because he does sound different. He doesn't sound like the same person when you close your eyes and say, "Well, that okay, I hear a similarity, but that guy can't be Superman because his Clark Kent is he stutters, he's high pitched, he's fumbling with his words, and then his Superman is extremely confident, very well spoken, very intelligent. Doesn't sound like the other guy at all. But again, it's two different voices, man, for sure. Superman, and as we kind of round this thing out here, again, like I'm bagging on characters. I don't mean to do that, but for me personally, Phil, I don't think that Superman has this rich history like Batman has, where and again, it's two different worlds, two different characters, two different mindsets, right? But for me, and I think they did a Superman year one, actually, but they're just calling it that. They've done year ones for characters. They just call it that. Like, I don't know. It's just not the same to me. Like, this just feels it just got a different feel. Is that because it's Batman or because it's Frank Miller? Is it I mean, is it a combination of both, you think?
I think Batman just lends himself to the tones that Miller is good at, and that's when you think of like those pulp comics, like excuse me, The Shadow or something like that, or noir books, like it just fits. It just fits his style of books. So I think that's part of what makes his book so appealing. But and when you think of Superman, you just think of like you know straightforward superhero stuff. Batman is kind of in his own world.
Yeah.
Um,
Batman's DIY. Superman's already had it done for him.
yeah, and I mean, there's iconic Superman books. Like you've got what Red Sun, you've got
Hmm.
Superman for All Seasons and stuff like that. Um, but I never really got into graphic novels like I did with Batman because I just think it's just such a different experience reading Batman comics.
Yeah, I agree. There's just nothing like it. I mean, other characters can have similarities. We've talked about the Punisher here on the pod before. There's similarities. There's similarities to other dark characters and stuff, but there's no one quite like Batman for sure. Kids, the third M and 6M is Marvel. We've said that a bunch, but we do have a love for some of these DC guys, man, and gals. I mean, there's great characters with rich histories and well written. Batman's top of the pops for me, man. He really is. Like he's really up there. Um, Dude, in terms of this book, let's see if we can put a pin in it. What do you think? What's your final thoughts? What's your last word on Batman Year One?
Um, I would go as far to say this is probably the most one of the most influential comics of all time. Um, and just what Frank Miller did for this character, it just cannot be understated, man. And not even just this character, what Frank Miller did for comics cannot be understated. I mean, you know that what he did is important when you see people try to duplicate what he did with these books with other characters. Like you've got what is Spider-Man Reign, which is basically Dark Knight Returns with Spider-Man,
Yes, yes.
or you've got other year one books like what they did with Robin year one or Batgirl year one. There are so many people that tried to duplicate what he did, and I think that just goes to show how special this book was.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked earlier about what he had done for Wolverine. I did not mean to intentionally dismiss Chris Claremont here, kids. Frank Miller was a co-plotter on Wolverine, the miniseries, of course. I mean, he's an artist first and foremost. So, yeah, Chris Claremont, another podcast, another time, the definitive voice of the X-Men, you could say. And maybe we'll get to that one of these days. Um, but yeah, I agree with you, man. He's Frank Miller's one of a kind. I mean, there's been a lot of great creators before him. There's been some great creators after him. No one's quite like him. And the voice that he brings to Batman, what he brought to Daredevil, this, as you said, and Sin City has its place. And is it going to be revered as much as Year One in Dark Knight Returns? I think time will tell on that. Maybe. I don't know what people feel about it now, but it's always going to have its fans for sure. But for me, yes, it begins and ends with Dark Knight Returns because that's what got everything started sort of into the mainstream. But you cannot ignore the ground that Year One covers. And as you said, Phil, this thing, the blueprint's been laid out and other people have tried to follow it. But just like other bands try to follow the hit of the day, they're only trying to follow it. They're not the hit of the day. So they will have varying levels of success, but they may never quite have the success that the first guy had. So as comic book fans, we want this medium to continue. There's been rumors abounding for past couple of years of possibly the publications ceasing at some point. I hope that never happens. I like to hold a book in my hands. And I always, my copy of Batman Year One is a well-worn copy, kids. And Phil, I don't know about you, but I don't actually have the floppies of this series. I do have the graphic novel, and I think it's a first printing. It is first printing, August '88. And it's a well-worn copy. It's in good shape, but it's well-worn. But yeah, I like to hold these things in my hands, kids. And I'm telling you out there, if you listen to this, if you've never read Year One, if your only exposure is the films, okay, but do yourself a favor. Start with Year One and everything else you can read after that. But Year One is called Year One for a reason. It's a great great jumping off point. And there's no reason to stop there. Keep trucking, man. Batman is well worth your time, and so especially is this work by Frank Miller. And that is Batman Year One. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.